Well, here in Berlin, the leaders of Germany, France, and Poland have concluded talks on Ukraine with a promise of more weapons and ceaseless support for Kyiv. The trio agreed their countries would provide long-distance artillery to help Ukraine defend itself against Russia. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and the French President Emmanuel Macron, they were also looking to smooth over their own differences on how best to support Ukraine.
A signal of unity and solidarity. The leaders of Germany, France and Poland showing their continuing support for Ukraine. Scholz, Macron and Tusk want to boost the supply of ammunition to Kyiv. Olaf Scholz listed ways that can be achieved quickly. Among other things, we will now procure even more weapons for Ukraine on the entire global market. This is a good improvement. Secondly, the production of military equipment will be expanded, including through cooperation with partners in Ukraine. And third, within the Ramstein format, we are establishing a new capability coalition for long-range rocket artillery. Statements of intent, but little detail. We will continue to support Ukraine and its people for as long as necessary, and we will continue, as we have done since day one, never to take the initiative of any escalation. That last point, perhaps a reference to Scholz's reluctance to provide powerful Taurus missiles from Germany's stocks. The Chancellor says sending Taurus could be seen by Russia as an escalation of the conflict. Macron has also called for nations to consider sending Western troops to Ukraine, but Scholz has ruled that out as well. So there is reason to believe these three countries may not be as united as they claim. Then there were these comments in the Bundestag this week from a senior member of Scholz's party. Isn't it time we not only talked about how to fight a war, but also about how to freeze a war and later to end it? Whether Tusk and Macron asked the Chancellor about that suggestion, we do not know. Instead, the public talk was only of unity. Europe and we, as the Weimar Triangle, are aware of our responsibility for the future of transatlantic relations. And we are also aware that we Europeans bear responsibility for our own security and future. And no one can take this responsibility away from us. Discussion of the best way to help Ukraine will continue, and soon. The three leaders will meet again next week at the European Council in Brussels.
I'm joined now by Christoph Gottschalk. He's a senior policy and strategy advisor and a former advisor to the French Prime Minister. Mr. Gottschalk, it's good to have you with us on this Friday evening. What did you make of today's meeting of these three leaders here in Berlin?
Thanks for having me. I think it was, in principle, really important to have that meeting. Was it necessary? Yes. Was it a turning point, a game changer? No. It was not the sort of meeting and message where we would say, you know, the whole European Union is energized now and we have a new level of security and confidence. But it was important to hold that meeting. And what was also very important is that Tusk, during the press conference, also expressed his invitation to Scholz and Macron, to Poland, so that the Weimar Triangle keeps on working. And I think these symbols are important now, but I think they could be even more confident and inspiring in the future.
If you could, tell me, why do you think this meeting was important? Why did the leaders of France, Germany, and Poland, why did they need to come together now?
I think it's really important to talk here for a second about the logic of European integration and what we learned from history. So the countries, Germany, France, and Poland, are very different for so many reasons. And what we learn from the history of European integration is whenever three countries, which are really different, find a way to work together, to define their common goals, and to find a mode of functioning, then for the other member states, it is often a compromise which is helpful and which can be used. And I think this is why it was not good that the Weimar Triangle was not so present over the last months and years. And I think now with Tusk, a very, very senior, experienced European leader, who was president of the council, I think there is a great opportunity to move forward in a very constructive way. And final point, when you ask why was it important, of course, there was a lot of friction between France and Germany on open stage over the last days and weeks. And it's so important to meet in person, to rebuild trust and to change the tone, of course, between the two countries.
Yeah, tone and the optics are one thing, but substance is another. We've got the French president suggesting that maybe we should talk about sending Western troops to Ukraine. We've got the German chancellor not even willing to entertain that and saying that we don't even want to send cruise missiles to Ukraine. That's a very big divide, wouldn't you say?
It's a huge divide, and this is why they have to meet much more in the coming weeks. What is important to understand is also the domestic side of things. So in France, of course, President Macron, also yesterday night on TV, he's sending messages domestically to the far left with Mélenchon, to the far right with Le Pen, who are known to be rather friendly with Russia. In Germany, of course, Scholz has to handle a very tricky coalition, and he knows from opinion polls that the German public is not so happy with the idea of sending weapons. And this, of course, explains why they are sending strong messages, but they have to come together now. I mean, if Europe has ever waited for a moment to come together, to be strong and to send a confident message to Russia, it is really now.
Christoph Gottschalk, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us tonight. Excellent analysis and context, a very important story. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good evening.
Well, I'm joined by Michal. Baranowski. He's the managing director at the think tank, the German Marshall Fund East, and he is in the Polish capital tonight. Michal, it's good to have you with us. The German, French, and Polish leaders are making a strong effort to stress unity when it comes to Ukraine. Are you convinced that there's more here than just optics?
Absolutely. This is the beginning of a key European cooperation, of a key European format, really to facilitate a greater aid of EU for Ukraine, and frankly, to jumpstart European security and defense cooperation. This meeting comes at the end of a visit by Prime Minister Tusk to United States, where he saw firsthand that at the moment, the military aid to Ukraine from the United States is blocked, and Europe needs to step up. We just have no other choice.
And is that what we're seeing? These three leaders, these three countries, can they fill the void that is being created by American inaction?
These three countries will spur the whole of EU to action. It's already happening. EU has already agreed to finance the shells, 155 millimeter shells found by the Czech government that will be soon transferred to Ukrainian forces to push back on Russian forces. But it's only a beginning. Look, the fact is that we are in a critical moment of the war. If Ukraine doesn't get the right weapons, we'll see a breakdown in the front in the worst case scenario. And today's meeting is a beginning, but of a robust response from the EU with the Weimar Triangle, with Poland, Germany, France leading the way. That's the political message. That's the concrete message coming out of this summit.
I'm wondering what this looks like from where you are there in Poland. You've got a French president who has even entertained the possibility of sending Western European troops to Ukraine. And you've got a German chancellor who won't even talk about that. And he's against sending cruise missiles to Ukraine. I mean, these two leaders going, when they go to Poland one day, they're not reading from the same sheet, are they?
So Donald Tusk, Prime Minister of Poland, invited the two leaders to visit Warsaw, visit Poland in summer. So this meeting will, in fact, take place. History is moving fast, and you're right that we are not on the same page, all of us, just yet. But the commonalities are becoming greater. The language that, for example, President Macron is using right now, describing Russia as an existential threat to Europe, describing the war in Ukraine as war that affects all of us. That's a language that not a long time ago would be inconceivable coming from a French leader, something you would expect from Central European leader. But now he's in fact saying just that. So we are moving in the right direction, in a common direction, and we frankly have to move pretty fast because history is speeding up and history is playing out in Ukraine with Russia's war there.
And Donald Tusk, he recently won the election. I'm wondering, in your opinion, if he had not won the election, if we had a conservative government still in power, would we be having this conversation today?
I think that would be much harder. Weimar Triangle is experiencing an entirely new chapter. If the previous government continued, we would have a large, deep tension between Warsaw and Berlin, tensions that are now very quickly being replaced by productive relationships. So, of course, that changed very, very much. Poland's place in Europe has also changed with the election of October 15th last year. Many would say that with the change in the election, with a European democratic government, the center of gravity is in fact shifting to the east, the center of gravity of the EU. And I think today's Weimar Triangle meeting is showing just that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. And I think a lot of people in Eastern Europe would agree with you. Mr. Michal Baranowski with the German Marshall Fund East, we appreciate your time and your analysis tonight. Thank you.
Great to be with you.
Our chief international editor, Richard Walker, who is joining us from our Berlin studio. Richard, a major announcement there on boosting weapons production inside Ukraine. But is that the main takeaway?
Well, I think that's definitely one of the takeaways of this meeting. And this meeting, I mean, let's just quickly explain what this is, the Weimar Triangle. This is, that means it's a grouping of three countries. It's Germany, it's France, it's Poland. This grouping goes back to the days after the end of the Cold War, when there was a move to try and get these three countries cooperating together. And this has been dormant in recent times because Poland was being governed by a nationalist government that was not seen as really conducive to cooperation between these three. Now there's a new centrist government with Donald Tusk, the man we just saw there, now leading as Poland's prime minister. He's a man with a lot of European experience. He used to be a president of the European Council. So this is now an effort to say, OK, we three countries should get the show back on the road and really start cooperating at a time when, particularly, Ukraine is in big trouble. And that's why there's so much focus on munitions and other ways of supporting Ukraine. Ukraine urgently needs more weapons. It particularly needs ammunition. So this has been an issue over the last couple of years. It's getting more and more urgent. Now there's this announcement that there's going to be kind of joint production between at least France and Germany. We don't have much in the way of details, but one German company, Rheinmetall, did already announce yesterday that it's going to be building production facilities in Ukraine. So we had an inkling yesterday that something like this is coming along. Macron saying that more details are to be ironed out, but this looks like an attempt to get German and French, at least those two countries, weapons producers working together on Ukrainian soil to try and get supplies through to Ukraine. But the kind of bigger picture of this, I mean, there was so much talk of unity, so much talk of, we're all together, we all share the same goals. But this has come after a time where there's been a lot of squabbling, both implicitly out in the open and behind closed doors. So there was a little bit of a sense of that they do protest too much, and the handshake at the end. And the really telling fact that they didn't take any questions. And that is really extraordinary for three supposedly friendly governments, leaders of governments, to stand here in Berlin, make these statements to the press and just say, oh, well, sorry, we're not going to take any questions. That really stands out. Last time something like that happened in Berlin, it was the premier of China, Li Qiang, who was here. The time before that happened, that I remember, it was Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, who never does press conferences. So it was really striking for these three not to take questions. I think that's a sign that behind the scenes, they're not getting on nearly as well as they appear to be, or they want to profuse to be.
Yes, a strong sign of unity there, as you said, especially there at the end of the press conference, the three of them all shaking hands. But there are different points of views on several issues. Can you run us through those?
Yeah, so, I mean, what's really come to the surface in recent days is from Emmanuel Macron, the French president, who has suddenly started saying that it would be wrong to rule out European troops being sent to Ukraine to help the Ukrainians. Now, this is something that so far on the Western side has very much been ruled out. The idea being that the West, and particularly NATO, does not want to get drawn into a conflict with Russia, and therefore it focuses wholly on providing Ukraine with the weapons to then defend itself rather than having any boots on the ground. Emmanuel Macron has in recent days started saying we shouldn't rule anything out. He's been very ambiguous about exactly what he means, what kind of a troop presence that might refer to. But this has caused a lot of ruffled feathers, particularly here in Germany, where Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, has pretty much the absolute opposite approach to this question. He is constantly emphasising that Germany will never become a party to this war, that it never wants NATO to become potentially involved in a war with Russia. And he said this also in his comments today. So there was a different, even though these, the divisions did not come out into the open, they were there implicitly in some of the things that they said. For instance, Olaf Scholz said, we are not at war with Russia. So really emphasising what we're not going to do, whereas Emmanuel Macron was emphasising our security and our future is also at stake here. So hinting at, that Europe might need to do significantly more to keep itself safe from Vladimir Putin, especially if he wins this war. So differences in emphasis, for all the smiles, for all the handshakes, the fact that no questions taken, and this difference in emphasis shows that these three leaders have a lot more to do to get really on the same page.
They also mentioned support for Moldova. Is that the next step? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so Moldova is a very small country, sort of sandwiched between Ukraine and Romania. And there've been long-standing concerns that Vladimir Putin's attention will turn to Moldova next. It's highly vulnerable, it's much smaller than Ukraine, has much less of a potential to defend itself. And certainly the thought is that if Ukraine were to fall completely, then it wouldn't take much more for Vladimir Putin to take control of Moldova. And he's already indicated that this is on his list of to-dos. His foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, has spoken about Moldova in recent months. And there's also been bubbling disputes within a region of Moldova with a Russian ethnic minority. So the concern over this small, vulnerable country has been there for a long time. So we'll be watching next week, particularly at the European Council, when the whole European Union will be gathering together to see what kind of steps they may be taking and thinking about in terms of concrete support to Moldova going forward.
Richard, it appears that out of the three, Tusk, Macron and Scholz, Olaf Scholz is the one who is most careful about sending soldiers and also about his stance on the longer range rockets or missiles, rather, to send to Ukraine. Remind us, why is the German Chancellor so careful here?
Well, I think there are a couple of reasons for this. I mean, on the one hand, Olaf Scholz, caution is kind of, part of his brand. He's a man who has always liked to present himself as a safe pair of hands. This was kind of part of his branding when he ran for election at the last election, that he is somebody who really considers things before making major decisions. And this is something that he's stressed very much in communicating with the German people over the course of this conflict, that he has the security of the German people is of course, his primary objective, and everything that caution is really one of his watchwords. So that's part of his brand. It's part of it, I think, genuinely part of his thinking. He is a cautious personality. On the other hand, he also faces domestic political issues. Now, I should add that this is also part of the picture with Emmanuel Macron. There's a lot of talk that, him trying to make this bold statements at the moment is partially calculating about the European elections are coming up. and thinking that that's the kind of message that will make him look strong, potentially win support in France in the European elections. I think Olaf Scholz has, again, the reverse calculation, that he feels that caution has been his watchword. He's got to where he is through caution. And also his Social Democratic Party, centre-left party, contains many people who are extremely against providing more support, including some of its top people. So he has a lot of domestic political considerations there.
Thank you very much. Our chief international editor, Richard Walker, there. And joining us now is DW chief political editor Michaela Küfner. Michaela, you listened to that press conference, a major announcement on boosting weapons production inside Ukraine. Is that the main takeaway?
Well, the main takeaway is the unity that these three key nations within the European Union have clearly made the top line of this gathering of the so-called Weimar Triangle of France, Poland and Germany for the first time at this highest level in years. Clearly, there's also more than symbolic value to France and Germany announcing that there would now be ammunition and potentially other military equipment production on Ukrainian soil together with French and German companies. We know that one company at least is already drawing up plans to become active. Now, this would potentially be a game changer, but it would also, of course, present a new target for Russia when it comes about. We also heard a pledge for a new alliance, they called it, for long-ranging missiles. We expect more concrete details on that as the US-hosted meeting of sponsors of Ukraine is happening at the Ramstein Air Base here in Germany next week, but also with the upcoming EU summit, which includes a meeting of defense ministers. So the details clearly still being worked out. What all sides have in common, that they don't want Russia to win and will increase their support for Ukraine at the forefront. And, well, those issues where they don't agree simply not mentioned at this gathering today.
But there are several issues that they are not agree on. Where are the fault lines?
The fault lines are what you rule out and what you don't rule out. And Emmanuel Macron rather spectacularly didn't rule out the eventual arrival of ground troops in Ukraine to defend Ukraine against Russia. That is something the German Chancellor was very quick to deny as a possibility for Germany. He basically promised the German people that there would be no troops on the ground from Germany and no German troop involvement. That's also his reasoning why he's not supplying the Taurus cruise missile system that the Ukrainians desperately want as well. And we also had Donald Tusk, whose foreign minister went on record saying, well, ground troops ultimately are not unthinkable, but of course it depends on how things progress. So there is still this fault line between the French take on strategic ambiguity, as it's called, keeping the other side guessing what you might be willing and capable of doing, and the German take, and particularly Chancellor Scholz's take, who's trying to portray himself as a Chancellor of peace, particularly towards the German people, which clearly rules out any kind of German involvement. And that is two heads of government speaking there who are both domestically under pressure. So the one most at ease and most level-headed potentially at this moment in time is Donald Tusk, who's only recently come into office as Prime Minister in Poland.
Do you think there's a sense of rivalry there between Macron and Scholz?
Well, let's put it this way. I mean, we're hearing at all levels that these two leaders who are so vital for Europe remaining united, but also taking further steps, really don't see eye to eye. Also, the working level really not working as smoothly as one could expect them to be. And that's why we are getting these mixed signals on who eventually really is leading the way on this. We did hear French President Emmanuel Macron speaking on TV, where he reiterated that he wouldn't rule out ground troops, also speaking of the special responsibility France has as a nuclear power. Well, Germany is Europe's largest economy. It also has special responsibility, but I think it's safe to say that both are clearly also playing to domestic audiences ahead of those European elections.
Our chief political editor, Michaela Küfner, there. Thank you very much, Michaela.